It was a Wednesday morning in March of 2011 when I first drove out to the Alderman Place on County Road 7, just south of Harlan, Kentucky. I wasn't planning to buy it. That needs to be said first, because later on, people acted like I had it all figured out from the start, like I had some kind of plan. I didn't. I had a '98 Ford F-250 with a cracked manifold, a thermos of coffee my daughter-in-law had made too weak, and about 45 minutes to kill before I was supposed to meet a seed distributor over in Wallens Creek. The sign was what stopped me. It was a county tax auction notice, stapled to a wooden post near the gate, the kind printed on pale yellow paper that turns almost white when it gets wet. It had been rained on at least twice. The text was still readable, though. I remember standing there with one boot in the gravel and one in the weeds, squinting at it. The property was listed at $1. $1. Now, I've seen tax auction properties go for low numbers before. Abandoned double-wides, overgrown lots with nothing but a concrete pad and a mailbox. But this was listed as 42 acres with a standing structure. I wrote the auction number down on the back of a receipt I had in my shirt pocket. I wasn't sure why. Something about it didn't sit right, not in a bad way, more like when you hear a name that you recognize but can't place. I drove on, met the seed distributor, came back home. But I kept thinking about it. Let me back up a little. My name is Earl Combs. I'm 69 years old now, and I've farmed this corner of Harlan County most of my adult life. My father farmed it before me and his father before him. We run about 210 acres total, mostly hay and timber with some beef cattle on the lower pastures. It's not a glamorous operation. Never has been. My wife, Norma, passed in 2007. She had been sick for about 3 years before that, so when it finally happened it wasn't a surprise, but a thing doesn't have to be a surprise to hurt you. I kept farming because that's what I knew how to do. Some mornings that was enough of a reason. By 2011 I had gotten myself steady again. My son, Dale, had moved back to help run the place after a stint working equipment repair in Lexington. He was skeptical of most of my ideas, which was useful in its own way. He kept me from making more mistakes than I might have otherwise. I mentioned the Alderman farm at supper that Thursday. Dale put his fork down and looked at me. "You've got plenty of land," he said. I told him I wasn't necessarily talking about buying it. I was just talking. "That place has been empty since before I was born," he said. "There's a reason nobody's touched it." I asked him what reason. He shrugged and picked his fork back up. Some places just get left. I called the county assessor's office the next morning and asked about the property history. The woman I spoke with, pleasant enough, clearly busy, told me the taxes hadn't been paid since 1987. The last listed owner was a man named Clarence Alderman, no next of kin on file. The property had been sitting in administrative limbo for over 20 years, bouncing between delinquent status and county receivership, until they finally decided to move it through auction. I asked if anyone had expressed interest. She said not in recent memory. I asked if the structure was still standing. She said the county hadn't done an interior inspection. She said the exterior had been photographed in 2009 and appeared to be standing, but she couldn't tell me much more than that. I thanked her and hung up. That afternoon, I drove back out to County Road 7. The gate was a standard farm gate, the old galvanized kind with 5 horizontal bars, chained but not padlocked. I lifted the chain off the post and drove through, got out and looped it back so the gate stayed shut behind me. The lane leading back to the house was about a quarter-mile of gravel that had mostly gone back to dirt and grass. My truck handled it fine. The fields on either side were grown up in old broom sedge and blackberry, the kind of thick tangled growth that happens when ground gets left alone for a decade or more. Here and there I could see the faint trace of old fence lines where the posts had rotted down to stubs. The house itself was a 2-story wood frame, White paint mostly gone to gray, tin roof showing some rust, but still intact from what I could see. A covered porch ran across the front. One of the porch boards had given way, and there was a gap near the steps. The windows on the ground floor were still whole. That surprised me. I sat in my truck for a minute and looked at it. There was something about the way a house looks when it's been empty a long time. It's hard to describe exactly. The windows get a certain quality to them, not dirty necessarily, just still, like they've stopped expecting anything. I got out and walked toward the house. That's when I saw the cellar door. It was set into the ground on the east side of the house, maybe 20 feet from the foundation. The old style, 2 wooden doors laid at an angle, the kind you'd lift up from the outside to go down into the ground. The wood was dark and swollen with age, iron hinges gone almost completely to rust. One of the doors was open. Not broken open, not fallen in. Open, propped up on its hinge as if someone had lifted it and let it rest there. I stood about 10 feet away and looked at it. The opening was dark. I couldn't see much from where I was standing, just the top few steps of a wooden staircase going down into black. The smell coming out of it was the kind you get from deep soil, wet clay, old wood. There was something underneath that I couldn't name right off. I walked closer. The hinges on the open door showed orange rust along the edge where the 2 leaves met, but where the door had been resting against the frame, the underside surface, the rust was thinner, fresher looking almost, like the door had been moved not too long ago and the rust hadn't had time to fully set back in on the contact point. Someone had opened this door, not 20 years ago, more recent than that. I didn't go down into it that day. Something about it didn't sit right. Not fear exactly, just the feeling that I ought to understand more before I went poking around in someone else's dark. I walked back to my truck and drove home. The auction was held on the first Friday in April in the county courthouse annex. There were 9 people in the room, including me and the auctioneer, a heavy-set man named Garland Faust who I'd seen at other county sales over the years. The other 8 people were mostly there for other lots, an overgrown residential parcel, a storage building, a quarter-acre lot near town. When the Alderman property came up, Garland read the description in his flat professional voice. 42.3 acres, Harlan County, County Road 7, standing structure, minimum bid $1. Nobody raised a hand but me. Garland looked around the room once. Sold, he said, and moved on. Afterward, a man named Harold Deaton, he worked in the county planning office, came over and shook my hand and said, "Earl, you know that property's got drainage problems on the lower half." I told him I'd looked at it. He said, "You're braver than me." He wasn't being mean about it, he was just being honest. I signed the paperwork, paid my $1, drove home. Dale was waiting on the porch when I got back. I told him I'd bought it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What do you want with 42 acres of nothing?" I told him I wasn't sure yet. He shook his head and went inside. That was about as much disagreement as Dale ever showed. He wasn't a man who argued long. He just registered his opinion and got back to work. My neighbor to the north, a man named Gene Tackett who'd been farming since before I was born, stopped by that Saturday. He heard things fast. Gene was 81 years old and moved like he was 60. He had opinions about most things and shared them freely. "Alderman Farm," he said, not as a question. I said yes. "Clarence Alderman's been dead since, I don't know, long time before the taxes stopped. Did you know that?" I said I didn't. "Somebody was paying those taxes for years after he died," Gene said. "Then they stopped." He didn't say who. I asked him. He pulled at the brim of his cap and looked out at my pasture like he was thinking about something else. "I don't remember," he said. But the way he said it didn't sound quite like forgetting. I started going to the property in the mornings before my own work got going. I'd drive over, walk the fields, try to get a sense of the land. The lower half was indeed wet. Jean and Harold had both been right about that. There was a creek that came off the ridge and spread out across about 8 acres before finding its way to the drainage ditch along the road. In spring, it was basically a shallow marsh. Cattails had moved in along the edges. The upper fields were different. The soil up there was darker, heavier. The kind of ground that held moisture without drowning. You could see where crops had been grown. The land still held the faint memory of rows if you looked at it right, the way old fields do. The barn was standing but not sound. The loft floor had given way in 2 spots, and the main beam was bowed in the middle. I made a note of it and kept my distance from the center. The house I could walk through on the ground floor. The smell inside was the familiar one of any old abandoned house, mouse droppings, dust, old wood going soft. But the plaster walls were mostly intact. The kitchen had a cast iron cookstove still sitting against the wall. The cabinets had been left with their doors open, empty. Whoever had cleared this place out had done it thoroughly. No furniture, no curtains, no personal items of any kind that I could see. Except in one room. The room at the back of the house on the east side had a built-in cabinet along one wall, floor to ceiling, with a wooden latch. The kind of cabinet made for a specific purpose. The doors were closed. I opened them. On the middle shelf, pushed back against the wall, was a single composition notebook. The black and white marbled kind. It was dusty but dry. I picked it up. The cover had no name on it. Inside the front cover, in pencil, in handwriting that was careful but not fancy, someone had written a date. September 14, 1962. I stood in that empty back room with the morning light coming through a dirty window, and I read the first page. It was a list. Measurements mostly. Numbers followed by notations I didn't immediately understand. Depths, it looked like. Distances measured in feet and fractions of feet. And then beside some of the measurements, brief descriptions. Good, one said. Clay layer begins. Another said limestone shelf approx. 4 ft. Another said simply stop here. At the bottom of the first page, underlined twice, it said, do not disturb below 18 ft. I closed the notebook. I stood there for a minute, just holding it. My grandfather had kept notebooks like this. Not this subject exactly, but the same kind of handwriting, the same kind of matter-of-fact precision. Men of that generation who worked land didn't write the way people write now. They wrote to record, not to explain, just to remember. I put the notebook in my jacket pocket and went home. That night at the kitchen table, I went through the notebook page by page. It was 41 pages of entries, all in the same hand, covering dates from September 1962 through sometime in the spring of 1966. The entries weren't daily. Sometimes there were gaps of weeks. They were records of what appeared to be excavation work. Measurements taken at different points on the property, depths reached, observations about what was found at each depth. Most of it was soil science. Clay layers, gravel lenses, bedrock depth. The kind of information a man might want if he was planning drainage work or a foundation or a well. But there was a section in the middle of the notebook, about 15 pages in, where the entries changed tone. The handwriting got smaller, more compressed. The dates got closer together, and the measurements stopped being about soil types and started being about a specific location, described in the notebook only as the East Foundation corner. At that location, whoever was writing had gone deeper, much deeper. The last entry at that location was dated March 3, 1966. The depth recorded was 31 feet. Below the number in the same small handwriting were 4 words. It was already here. I brought the notebook to Gene Tackett the next morning. Gene sat at his kitchen table and read through it slowly. He didn't say anything for a long time. His wife, Marvella, brought us both coffee and then quietly left the room. When Gene finally looked up, His expression was careful. "This is Harlan Alderman's writing," he said. Clarence Alderman's father. He would have been in his 50s in the 1960s. Jean had known him. "He was a quiet man," Jean said. "Private, kept to himself more than most." He paused. "He was also one of the most careful men I ever knew. If he wrote something down, it was because it needed to be written down." I asked Jean what he thought the notebook was describing. He turned back to the middle section and read a few of the entries again. His lips moved slightly. "Harlan Alderman put in a root cellar expansion in about 1963 or 1964, Jean said finally. "I remember because he borrowed my transit level. He didn't say exactly what he was doing, just said he was expanding the cellar." I asked how deep a standard root cellar went. 6 feet, maybe 8, 10 at the outside. I said the notebook showed 31 feet at one point. Jean nodded slowly. "Yes," he said, "it does." I went back to the property that afternoon. This time I brought a flashlight. The cellar door was still propped open the way I'd first found it. I stood at the top of the stairs for a while, pointing my light down. The stairs were wood, steep, and they looked fragile but not completely rotted through. I tested the first step with my weight. It held. I tested the second. It held too. I went down. The main cellar room was about 12 by 14 feet. Stone walls, dirt floor, low ceiling. There were old wooden shelves along 2 walls empty. The air was cold and damp, the kind of cold that comes from deep ground, not from winter. I moved my light around the room carefully. The floor was mostly packed dirt, but in the far right corner, the east corner, what the notebook called the east foundation corner, the floor was different. The dirt there was darker, looser looking, and the ceiling above that corner had a wooden cover built into it, not original stonework but a frame of lumber, maybe 4 feet square, built into the ceiling and covered with boards. I looked at it for a while. The boards were old, but some of them were newer than others. 2 of the boards in the center showed less grime than the ones around them. I pushed on one. It gave slightly. I decided not to go any further that day. I need to say something about why I was being careful. Part of it was practical. I didn't know what was up there, in whatever space was above that ceiling panel, and I didn't want to bring something down on top of me. But part of it was something harder to name. The notebook was someone's private record. The cellar was someone's private place. Even if the land was mine now by the county's accounting, I kept feeling like there was a right way and a wrong way to go about this. And busting through the ceiling with a pry bar on a Tuesday afternoon felt like the wrong way. I went to the county clerk's office and asked to look at the deed history on the property. The clerk, a young woman who couldn't have been 30, helped me pull the records. The property had been in the Alderman family since 1921, when a man named Luther Alderman purchased it from a family named Brock. The Brock family had owned it since at least 1889, which was as far back as the recorded deeds went in the county system. But there was a note clipped to the deed packet, a handwritten note on plain white paper in different handwriting from the notebook. It said in full, "See also Brock Estate Survey 1923, filed separately, Courthouse Annex, Box 14. I asked the clerk about Box 14. She went to look. Box 14 had been removed for archival processing in 2004 and had never been returned. I spent the next 2 weeks making calls. The State Archives in Frankfort, the University of Kentucky Special Collections, the Harlan County Historical Society, which operated out of a small building near the library and was staffed by a woman named Dolores Frazier, who knew more about this county's history than most people knew about their own families. Dolores was the one who found it. She called me on a Thursday morning and told me she had a copy of the 1923 Brock Estate Survey in her files, not the original, a photostatic copy that had been made in the 1970s by someone doing historical research. She didn't know who. I drove over that afternoon. The survey was a hand-drawn map of the property, detailed and precise with the house and outbuildings marked, the creek shown, the field boundaries drawn in. But on the east side of the house, in the area I'd been looking at, there was a notation. It read, Springhouse/Storage Original Construction Est. Pre-1850, depth unknown at time of survey. Below the house in the east corner, someone had drawn a small square and labeled it simply, Below. I went back to Jean Tackett. This time I brought the survey copy and the notebook both. Jean spread them out on his kitchen table and looked at them side by side for a long time. Marvella sat down this time. She'd been listening from the other room all along, I think. Pre-1850, Jean said. That's before the county was fully organized, before the Civil War. I said I understood that. You know what they kept in cellars back then, he said. It wasn't a question exactly. I said I had some ideas. Jean nodded. Root vegetables, canned goods, medicines, animals in hard winter. He paused. And other things. Marvella said, quietly, Harlan County was divided country during the war. She was talking about the Civil War. She was right. Harlan County had families on both sides. It had been rough country, remote, with loyalties that ran deep and complicated. Jean said, there are 3 or 4 places in this county I know of where families had hiding places. Deep ones. Not just root cellars. Places built to keep people safe when things got bad. He looked at the survey notation again. Pre-1850, he said. If the Brock family built something that deep, that early, they had a reason. I went back to the property on a Saturday in early May. The morning was clear and cool, the kind of spring morning that smells like mud and green coming up. I'd brought a good flashlight and a headlamp both. I'd brought gloves. I'd brought my son Dale, which took some convincing. Dale was skeptical, as usual. He followed me down the cellar stairs without a word, looked around the room, looked at the ceiling panel in the east corner. Who built that? He said. I told him about Harlan Alderman's notebook, the measurements, the dates. Dale looked up at the ceiling panel for a moment. Then he said, What's above this? I said I thought it was some kind of space between the cellar and whatever was underneath. A staging area, maybe. The kind of construction you'd use if you needed to seal something off but still wanted access. Dale looked at me. I'll hold the light, he said. I pushed the 2 newer boards aside carefully. They moved without too much resistance. The space above was about 3 feet tall, a rough-framed crawl space, dirt walls, no light. It smelled like old clay and something faintly mineral. Not bad exactly, just deep. I got up into it carefully. On the far side of the crawl space, maybe 10 feet in, there was a door. Not a modern door. A low wooden door, maybe 4 feet tall, set into the dirt wall and framed with hand-hewn timbers. The wood was dark, very dark, the kind of dark wood gets from being in constant damp for a very long time. There was a simple wooden bar across it, resting in 2 iron brackets. The bar was not set. It was resting beside the door, leaning against the wall. I came back down and stood in the cellar with Dale for a minute. That door, I said, has been opened recently. Dale said nothing. The cellar door outside was propped open when I first came here in March. That panel in the ceiling, 2 of those boards were cleaner than the rest, and that bar inside, it's been moved. Dale said, Somebody's been in here. I said, Somebody's been in here more than once, I think. Dale looked at me with the expression he gets when he's trying to decide whether I'm being foolish. It's a look I know well. He inherited it from his mother. Are you going through that door? He said. I said I was. He said, then I'm going first. We went through the door together. On the other side was a room. It was roughly cut from the earth. The walls shored up with timber framing that was old but still sound, the wood hard as iron the way very old oak gets. The floor was stone, flat stones fitted together with no mortar. The ceiling was timber and packed clay, held up by 4 posts in the corners. The room was maybe 20 feet by 12. Along the south wall were shelves, empty mostly, but some held old glass jars sealed, the contents long since turned to unrecognizable dark matter. There were 2 wooden crates near the shelves, empty. There were iron hooks along the walls, the kind you'd hang meat or tools from. But in the center of the room, on the stone floor, there was something else. A wooden chest, small about the size of a blanket box. Old, very old, the wood gray with age, the iron hardware gone dark red with surface rust but still intact. It had a hasp but no padlock. And beside the chest, on the floor, there was a folded piece of paper. Modern paper, white, clean. Dale picked it up. He read it and looked at me. "You better read this," he said. The note was handwritten in a shaky but legible script. It said, "If you're reading this, the land has changed hands. That's all right. I've been coming here since my father passed in 2003 and I didn't know what to do with what's here. I'm not well now and I can't make the trip anymore. I left the doors open on purpose so it wouldn't be sealed away forever. My father left instructions that whatever was found should stay where it belongs with the land and its history. I hope whoever finds this will understand. R.A. R.A." I stood there in that underground room with a flashlight in one hand and that note in the other, and I thought about the woman at the assessor's office telling me there was no next of kin on file. She'd been talking about Clarence Alderman, but Clarence had a son, apparently, or had someone who had been coming here, keeping faith with a promise. R.A. Clarence's son. Clarence Alderman's first name started with C. His father had been Harlan Alderman. The initial could stand for a lot of names, but in Harlan County, there are naming patterns that run through families like water through limestone. I thought about Harlan Alderman, a man born in this county who dug this deep into his own land and wrote it all down in careful pencil, who sent measurements into a notebook and filed it in a cabinet and left it there. It was already here. We opened the chest. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that had dried and cracked but mostly held, were several items. I'll describe them as carefully as I can. There was a Bible, leather cover, no date printed, but the paper and binding style suggested mid to late 1800s. Inside the front cover were handwritten names, a family record page, the kind that used to be common, where families wrote births and deaths and marriages. The earliest name was dated 1841. The family name written at the top was not Brock. It was a name I didn't recognize. Below the Bible were 3 folded documents. 2 were letters, handwritten, the ink faded to a soft brown. The third was what appeared to be a certificate of some kind, official in appearance, with a stamped seal that had gone too faint to read clearly. And beneath everything, wrapped separately in oilcloth, was a small tintype photograph. The image was of 2 people, a man and a woman, seated, formal in the way people were formal when photographs were still a rare and serious thing. They were not young. The man had a beard. The woman was looking slightly to the left of the camera, as if something had caught her attention at the last moment. On the back of the tintype, in ink that had faded but was still legible, someone had written 2 lines. The first line was 2 names. I won't write them here because I'm still working to confirm the family connection, but they were not names I recognized from the county's recorded history. The second line was a year, 1863. I brought everything to Dolores Frazier at the Historical Society. She sat with the items for 2 hours. She handled them the way you're supposed to, carefully, flat on the table, no stacking. She read the letters with a magnifying glass. She studied the certificate. Then she sat back and looked at me. "These people," she said, pointing to the names in the Bible, "are not in our records." I said I knew that. That's not unusual for this county in this period. she said carefully. There were people who moved through, people who couldn't be recorded the way others were. She paused. The Underground Railroad had documented activity in 3 Kentucky counties during the 1850s and 1860s. Harlan County was not one of the documented ones. She paused again. That doesn't mean nothing happened here. It means nothing was recorded. She looked at the tintype again. A room dug that deep, that carefully, in a farm in a county where loyalties were divided, with personal items belonging to people who aren't in any record. She stopped. I waited. Someone kept these people safe, she said, and then kept the evidence of it safe for 150 years. I stayed quiet for a moment in that room with the tintype photograph and the faded letters and the old Bible, and I thought about Harlan Alderman writing in his notebook in 1966, 4 years after he'd found this room while expanding his cellar. It was already here. He hadn't built the room, he'd found it, and he'd made the decision in 1966 not to say a word about it, not to disturb it, not to report it, just to measure it, record it carefully in his notebook, and close the ceiling panel and go about his life. And his son, R.A., had kept coming back, quietly, for years, making sure the door was still there, making sure it was all still in place. Until he couldn't come anymore, and so he left the door open instead. For whoever came next. I called the University of Kentucky's History Department in Lexington. They put me in touch with a professor who specialized in Civil War-era Kentucky. She drove down to Harlan County on a Thursday in June with a graduate student and spent a full day with the materials at the Historical Society. The certificate, she told me, was a freedom document, the kind issued privately in some cases during the late antebellum period, unofficial, not legally recognized in slaveholding states, but sometimes carried anyway. The stamp on it matched a style she had seen in similar documents from Ohio and Indiana. How it got to southeastern Kentucky she could not say with certainty, but she had ideas. The letters were personal correspondence. She could read enough of them to say they were written by someone describing a journey. The word safe appeared in both. She couldn't tell me definitively what the room had been used for. She said the evidence was strongly suggestive, but not conclusive. She said that was often the case with sites like this. History had a way of covering its tracks in places where covering tracks had been a matter of life and death. What she could tell me was that the room was real, the documents were real, and the family names in the Bible deserved serious research. She took photographs of everything. She handled it with the same kind of care Dolers had. Before she left, she stood outside by my truck and looked back at the house. The Alderman family knew what this was, she said. Both generations from what you've described, they made a decision to protect it. I said that was my reading of it too. She said that's not a small thing. The materials are now in the care of the Harlan County Historical Society, documented and stored properly. Dolers has been working with the university to establish the historical context. It'll take time. These things always do. The farm itself, I've kept it. Dale stopped questioning the decision about a year in, which is about as much endorsement as I expect from him. I've done some work on the upper fields. Planted a hay crop this past spring. The lower ground I've left mostly as it is. The marsh habitat has gotten healthy, and there's a pair of wood ducks nesting in the cattails that Dale's kids like to come watch in the evenings. The house I haven't touched beyond what's needed to keep the roof sound. The room underground I closed back up the way I found it, more or less. The door is shut. The bar is set. The ceiling panel is back in place. Someday the Historical Society may want to do a proper documentation of the space. Until then, I'm content to leave it. I replaced the cellar door outside, both halves, new cedar boards on the old iron hinges. I made sure it latches properly from the outside. But I left it the way R.A. had left it, in spirit at least. I made sure someone would know it was there, I made sure it wouldn't be forgotten again. I think about R.A. sometimes. I don't know if he's still living. I've made some quiet inquiries through the county records and haven't turned up much. There was a Robert Alderman born in Harlan County in 1951 who doesn't appear in any local records after about 2010. That could be him, could be someone else. If he's still out there somewhere, I'd like him to know that whatever he was keeping faith with, it's still being kept. I think about Harlan Alderman too. A man in his 50s in 1963, digging down into his own cellar to expand it, breaking through into something older and darker and quieter than he expected. Writing 4 words in a notebook and then closing everything back up and going on with his life. Not out of indifference, out of something closer to respect. It was already here. And before Harlan Alderman, whoever built that room, whoever fitted those stones together in the floor, whoever cut those timbers and set those posts and dug down 31 feet into a Kentucky hillside in the years before the Civil War, because someone needed a place to be safe, and they had the ground and the will to provide it. Their names aren't in any record I've found. Maybe they'll turn up eventually. Maybe they won't. But the room is there. The documents are there. The Bible with its family record page is there, in an acid-free box in a climate-controlled room in the Historical Society, waiting for someone to follow those names wherever they lead. That dollar I spent at the county auction didn't buy me much land-wise, if I'm being straight about it. The drainage problems on the lower half are real. The barn is going to need to come down before it comes down on its own. But some things you can't put a number on. That's something my father used to say. He said it about a lot of things that turned out to be true. I was 69 years old standing in a root cellar in Harlan County, Kentucky, holding a flashlight and a piece of paper left by a man I'd never met, looking at a door that was older than anyone alive. Some mornings, that's enough of a reason. Earl Combs farms in Harlan County, Kentucky. He has farmed the same ground, more or less, for 41 years.